Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sporting Max. Today we're joined by silver medal Olympian at long jump, and if I got my homework correct, I believe two-time gold medal Commonwealth Games medalist Gary Honey. Welcome to the podcast, Gary. It's incredible to have you on. How you going?
I'm going well, mate. How about yourself?
I'm really good, thank you. Now
coming up to episode 50 soon. I see on your
episode 50.
That's a fair effort from someone your age, I tell you.
Thanks, Gary. Now, growing up, what sports were you into as a kid, and what was your childhood like for you?
I grew up mostly from the age of about 4 in Thomastown, and so back then Thomastown was basically paddocks. There wasn't many houses. So we had a creek, which is now a drain, but it used to be a creek. You could swim in it. It was a brilliant upbringing. We had paddock upon paddock to play in. I was a mad Collingwood supporter. My whole family, my wife's family, everyone's Collingwood. So I started going to Collingwood games when I was 5. So I was mad on AFL footy, or VFL footy as it was then. And then when I turned 9, my grandfather, who was a Dutchman, he took us down to, I think it was the second year of Little Athletics in existence down at Preston Reservoir, and he took us down there and joined us up, and we had a run. My brother, we both did okay, and just went from there.
So when did you start to take a keen liking or sort of interest in long jump?
Well, it was interesting because in Little Athletics, I basically did everything. I didn't lose very many races, if any. No jumps. Wasn't good at high jump or the throws, obviously, but my father made me do them. So his saying was, if you bet the kids in most things, they can beat you in something. So I was made to do everything, which was good. And then I went into senior athletics, and I won a sub-junior Australian title in the triple jump, and I was more of a triple jumper up until I got to senior level. And then when I got to senior level, we had the second and third best triple jumpers in the world, in Ian Campbell and Ken Lorraway. So I didn't see a lot of future there as an 18 or 19-year-old. So I decided our number one long jumper had just retired. So I took up long jumping, and in 1979, I think it was, I won my first Australian title, and it just went from there, and it kept being long jump from then on in.
So were you always, when you were starting out in long jump, over sort of triple jump and things like that, were you always one of the best?
Yeah, I was. Especially, I was very small, Little Athletics. I was tiny, and I didn't really start growing till I was about 16. So I dominated pretty much up to I was about 13 or 14, and then I sort of was second, third, fourth, fifth best because the other kids got bigger, and they were just bigger and stronger than I was. My technique was probably better, but they were bigger and stronger. My dad just kept saying to me, they'll come back to you, they'll come back to you. And they did. And we made our best decision we made. My father and myself, we had to come up with a coach, and we had two choices. And luckily enough, I picked a man called John Boas, who was Ian Campbell's coach at that time, who was the second best triple jumper in the world. And we went with John, went to training the next Sunday, and I had the same coach my whole career.
Now, moving into the Olympics, I think you did compete at the Moscow 1980 Olympics. What was that sort of first sort of major event like for you on an international level?
It was tough because the year before I went to the World Cup in Montreal, and I made that team, and it's not as big a meet as the Olympics, obviously, and I did well. I jumped over 8 meters for the first time in my life, and it got me into the Moscow Olympics, but I probably wasn't ready, and I had an injury, a groin injury, an adductor tear, and it really curtailed my preparation. When I got to Europe, I was jumping really well, but my run-up was nowhere. It was terrible. And I did 3 fouls in the qualifying round. They were good jumps. They were all good jumps, but they were fouls. So I never made the final, and it was pretty disappointing. And but I learned a lot from it. And 4 years later, I was well and truly ready.
So what did you actually learn from that first experience at, like I mentioned, an international level?
Well, the first thing I learned was to get me run up right. So when we come back to Australia, we used to have 20 jumps off a full run in a training session, which jumpers today will just tell you that's not possible, but that's what we did. They hardly, the guys, my coach, who's now in his in his late 70s. He still coaches the second and third, fourth best jumpers in Australia, and they can't believe that. They don't jump very often. So but that's what we did, and I never had run-up problems again. So we sorted that out, and that's probably the most important thing I did. And I remember on the way home, John Daly, who was Glynis Nunn, who won a gold medal in 1984 in heptathlon, he was her coach, and he was also the coach of the Moscow Olympic team for track and field. And on the way home on the plane, he said, "Never let this happen again." And fortunately enough, it didn't.
Now you competed in 1982, 2 years later in the Commonwealth Games. Can you expand on the process you had to go through to make that Australian team?
Oh, look, it was fairly easy for me. By that time, I was well and truly the best jumper in Australia, and probably close enough to the best jumper in the Commonwealth the year before in 1981. I finished second in 1981 in the World Cup to Carl Lewis. So I was in, at that stage, I was well established. So it was easy for me to get in. I was in the Commonwealth Games team pretty much. I qualified easily. So I never, ever worried about making teams. I was more worried about winning medals than making teams. I just took for granted I'd make the team. So fortunately I did. And it was the Commonwealth Games in Brisbane. We're in Australia, so it was fantastic. But I'm not a sentimental type of person. I don't do opening ceremonies. I don't do closing ceremonies. I just go there and do my job, which was just to win medals and jump the best I could. So I went up to Brisbane and I was totally focused on winning the gold medal.
What was that like to win gold on home soil in that event?
It was fantastic. The only negative was on my third jump, which was the actual winning jump. I broke my foot. I had a stress fracture going in, and we knew it was. The doctor said, "Look, it could be okay, or you could break it on your first jump." And luckily, I got to the third jump before I broke it. But so it was. I jumped up when I did the jump, and then I quickly realised my foot was broken, and then I was on crutches. So I only had the 3 jumps, and on the day I was on crutches, and I was on crutches a little while after that. So that was a sort of a worry to me. But look, it was fantastic to get that cheer from the Australian crowd, and really to win for all your training partners and your coach, your family, and everyone like that. My wife to be and all that sort of stuff.
Can you take me through those gold medal moments?
1984, the gold medal. Well, I was I made the final by the qualifying distance I think was 790. So if you jump 790, you're automatically into the final. And the idea is to do it on your first jump if you think you're going to win a medal or be competitive. So I actually jumped 791, so qualified by 1 centimetre, and made it look like I meant it, but I didn't mean it. I was pretty unfortunately, I hurt my back when I did that. And when I got back to the village, by the time I got back to the village on the bus, my back was quite bad. So I went and saw the physio, and they tried a few things, and it didn't seem to get better. And he said, "Look, just sleep on it. I'll see how it is in the morning." Well, obviously, you're not going to sleep too well when you're in a lot of pain in your back. You've got the Olympic final the next day. By the time I went to the training track to warm up, I couldn't jog. So it was a bit of a problem. And anyway, the doctor came down and he said, "Look, I'm going to give you a jab. I'm pretty sure if the pain goes away, it's just a nerve thing. Once the pain goes away, it'll be okay." And then the plan was, if it wore off, I was to wave my towel and he'd meet me under the grandstand. That was the plan. So the first 2 rounds, it worked. The first 2 rounds, I was jumping okay. I was jumping in the 780s, which wasn't great. And then it started to hurt again. So I waved my flag, my towel, and we went under the grandstand. And sure enough, he was there, and he put another jab in. And first time he put it in, he put in about a quarter of the bottle. And he said, "Mate, I'm putting the whole lot in this time. You won't feel anything for quite a while." So he put it in. I came out on my next jump, the 3rd round, from under the grandstand, and jumped 8 metres 18. Now you can imagine there was a few jumpers in the field wanted to know what the hell went on under that grandstand, because it was a bit of a surprise. And for the next 2 rounds, so round 4 and 5, I was sort of pretty happy with myself. I was sitting in 2nd spot behind Carl Lewis. And next thing you know, an Italian guy who I didn't really know very much about, a guy called Giovanni Evangelisti, jumped 8:24, so put me in 3rd. And then there was a guy, Larry Morix, who, in everyone's opinion, was the 2nd best jumper in the world behind Carl Lewis. And he had 1 more jump left too, and he wasn't jumping well. He was choking up a bit, but he could jump well, you know what I mean? So I'm thinking I could go 2nd, 3rd, 4th. So luckily enough, I was the very next jumper after Evangelisti. and the 10,000 metre race was running down the straight as I was getting ready to jump, so the crowd was going crazy. And I took my run up back a full foot, which was because I knew I'd be running pretty hard and pretty fast. And luckily I did that because I had nothing to spare when I hit the board. And fortunately enough, jumped exactly the same distance as Evangelisti and beat him on a countback because I had a next best jump to him. So that gave me, Morris mucked up his last jump and there was a silver medal.
What was that Olympics like from your perspective? Coming second place to Carl Lewis, who sort of later on was caught cheating in the 88.
Oh, look, he wasn't caught cheating. A lot of people say that, but he basically was found to have a stimulant in his system at the US trials 2 or 3 years later. Now, pseudoephedrine was a stimulant. Now, if he was fair income trying to take something, he wouldn't take pseudoephedrine because it doesn't do much. So, look, I'm not saying he wasn't taking drugs, but it was never proven, put it that way. But coming second to Carl was amazing because Carl Lewis was the Michael Jackson of the 1984 Olympics. I mean, everything was about Carl. And the Olympics in 1976 in Montreal, they lost that much money. They're still paying for it. In 1980, the Russians had it, so no one knows how much it cost them. So coming into 1984, no one actually wanted the Olympics because no one could make money out of it. So people didn't have the money, but the Americans took it, and Peter Uberoth and another gentleman, I forget his name, they basically turned it into the corporate Olympics, the McDonald's this, all that sort of stuff. So everything was corporate. We had M&M machines everywhere, you had Coke machines everywhere. In the village, anything you wanted in the village was there. And they made so much money. And so it was the corporate Olympics. It was something that no one had ever seen before. So it was just great to be there. To get up on the dais, I was really lucky because all the Australian people that come to watch, they always sit together in a group. They were right behind the dais, which was around the middle of the first bend on the track, not in the middle as it normally is. And so they were all right there. My wife to be was there as well, and so it was a great experience. And but really, it's pretty surreal for the first period of time. Until you sort of get used to the fact you've just won a silver medal, and then I'm the sort of guy that 2 hours or 3 hours after the meet, I'm thinking, well, I've got to go to Europe and jump in a week, so I better start thinking about that. So that's the sort of bloke I am, unfortunately. So I enjoyed it. Look, it was great, and it's always there. But I was quickly onto the next thing, which I think most reasonably good athletes do.
Like you mentioned before, a jump of sort of 8.24 meters is what I would describe as insane. As an Olympic long jumper, what do you have to actually do to train your body and prepare your body for these types of events?
Well, I was by the time we got to the 1984 Olympics, I was training twice a day. I'd have 1 day off, so I'd have a 1 day rest a week, and I'd work in 3-week cycles. And my weight sessions would go for 3 hours, so flat out weights for 3 hours, and that was heavy weights. So I was squatting 600 pounds, and I was only 76 kilos myself. So I was doing insane weights, crazy weights. My training sessions were pretty full on. I mean, I had to be, because I was small. I was only 5'11" and 77 kilos. My power to weight ratio had to be off the charts, and we got it off the charts, and that's how I was able to run as fast as I was able to run and get that drive off the board. So I trained in 11 years. I never missed a session in 11 years. I trained when I was sick, which I probably shouldn't have, but I had an amazing work ethic to train because I always thought that, when you're in Australia, you don't get the competition you probably need most of the time. And I always used to think, well, the guys on the other side of the world, they'll be working hard, so I have to work harder. That was my ethic. But look, mainly a lot of speed work, sprint work, heavy weights, and plyometrics, which is jumping off benches, bounding, which is hopping, stepping over 40 or 50 meters, and then jumping, obviously.
Now, just 2 years later, after that Olympics, I see you won gold once again at the Commonwealth Games in Edinburgh. What was that experience like, and how was that? Do you think that was different to winning gold at your first Commonwealth Games?
It certainly was. In Brisbane, it was about 27 degrees. In Edinburgh, it was nowhere near that. Actually, the day of the final was pouring rain, and we actually warmed up on a squash court, believe it or not. So we basically ran laps of the squash court, I had another guy in the event, David Cole, but he was a young guy, only very young at that stage. And we warmed up on the squash court. So the warm-up was awful, but you just had to do what you could do. I jumped 8 metres, 8:08, which was really good in the conditions because the conditions were terrible. And I won fairly easily. And it was over pretty quick. So I had a lot of time to get used to it. But probably the funniest thing that happened there was that when I got up on the dais to get my medal, the Australian anthem didn't start playing. So I started singing it and conducting it, and the Australian people in the crowd started singing it. So that was a pretty nice moment. So something I remember.
I've read that you were ranked number 2 in the world in long jump from 1984 until 1986, and in the top 6 in the world from 81 until 1988. What's your perspective on being able to sustain your body at an elite and world-class level for a long period of time?
Well, look, I was very lucky with injuries. I had, as I said, the stress fracture, but that wasn't overly, big a deal. And in 1983, I had, 1987, I had osteoarthritis in both my big toes from pushing off jumping. That was just an operation to fix. The injury that really finished me off really was I tore my I tore my quad muscle off the bone and it curled up my leg, which is, well, it sounds really bad, but footballers get it occasionally too. I've got a lump on my leg, on my quad, if I tense it up. And well, I played some Super Rules footy. I turned 35 for 3 years, and every time first kick every game used to hurt. Then it was fine. So I was really lucky with injuries, which made me be able to have such a long career. And but when I got to the stage, I just had my first child. I had this injury, which was going to be a bad one, and I thought that was enough. And so 1990, I went to the Commonwealth Games. Probably shouldn't have went. I was wasn't in shape. I was injured, basically. I couldn't run anywhere near flat out. So I made the final, but it was a pretty disappointing way to end and probably shouldn't have won.
Now, moving on to 2000, you were inducted into the Sport Australia Hall of Fame. How did you feel when you found out you actually got inducted?
Well, it was really funny because my wife and kids were up the snow, and so I got this letter in the mail and didn't have any idea what it was. I opened it up, and I knew what it was once I opened it because I knew what the Australia Hall of Fame was.
Yeah.
Look, it's a phenomenal honour because, some of the people, when you go there, every year they have a award ceremony, and when you go there, there's superstars everywhere, and you get to meet them and talk to them because before the thing starts, you go into a room with all the other people, their wives and girlfriends and things, and you can talk to them. You walk up to anyone and talk to them. So that's a great thing. I've sat next to Steve Waugh for 2 or 3 years in a row, and
wow,
and that was great. It was fantastic. But it was a big thrill. And when we were with my family, I was able to take my 2 boys, and I think they were about 11 and 13 at the time, and they met Ian Thorpe and spent a bit of time with him. So it was great. It was a great day, a great night, and it's a big thrill and a great honour to be in the Sport Australia Hall of Fame.
Now 10 times an Australian champion, 11 times a Victorian champion. What's your best advice to anyone who wants to become a pro long jumper and be a world-class athlete like yourself?
Tell you what, you do your homework, mate. You've got it all down. Look, it's the biggest thing I could say to someone, you've got to really believe in yourself. But the biggest thing is you only get out of something what you put into it. So if you want to be a world-class athlete in anything, any sport, I don't care what it is, your ability will get you at a certain point. It won't get you all the way. So then it becomes the hard work. The harder the work, harder you work, the luckier you get. And I really believe that. So if anything you're doing, like what you're doing now, the more you put into it, the more effort you put into it, the harder you work, the harder you try, every stone unturned, you'll get the results.
Thanks, Gary, for coming on the podcast today and putting aside some of your time to come on and have a chat. It's been an honour.
Mate, it's been an honour to talk to you, mate. And good luck with the next, the 50th and the next 50 after that.
Thanks, Gary. Stay tuned, everyone, for more Sporting Max.